Okay, we are down to the home stretch. We have one session left to go, and we have been saving this session for the last. It's how recent G8, G20 research initiatives can contribute to the open data for agriculture system. And so I would invite Sarah and panel to come up while we do a little swap. And then after this, we will have some brief announcements, and then we will have the reception, which is what I think everybody's waiting for. And thanks to Crop Life International for hosting the reception tonight. Appreciate that.
Difficult time for us.
Yes, I know. So do you have everybody?
Yes, Sarah is here. Barbara, Hélène, Christian, Hélène. Hélène?
We may want to just start.
Yes.
Without.
Hélène.
Ah, there she is. Okay. For those of you who would like to get coffee and what's left of cookies and bars, please do. But for those of you just stretching, that's a good thing. But we're going to start this last session. We're running just slightly behind. Pretty good for today, only 5 minutes behind. So with that, I would love to hand it off to Sarah. Thank you.
I'm not Sarah, but I say good evening to everybody. I am Marianne Guillou, so I will moderate this session. And in fact, it's quite challenging. First, because I'm not the right person. Then, because it is the last session of the day. And then, because we have 5 very good speakers and the constraint to respect a very tight schedule. So I will be a very hard moderator. So our target is quite simple. It's to follow up on international G8 and G20 initiative and to see how those initiatives can contribute to open data for agriculture. So we have selected 5 major initiatives, and then we will listen to their target, their achievement at the moment, and the ways they could contribute to feed the open data for agriculture and food security system. You know, on the tweet there was a question: what food security challenge would you solve if you had data on something? So maybe we will have answer about that. So we have 1 hour. I will give 7 minutes to each speaker so that we have 15 minutes at the end of the session to listen to your questions, if you are still there. And then I will try to wrap up the session on time. So thank you, and I will introduce first Sarah Lawan, representing NEPAD. She will speak on behalf of Ibrahim Mayaki. And Sarah is in charge of the relations between the United Nations system and the NEPAD agency. She will present us a very interesting international initiative that has been launched in 2011 that is called WOW, the World Agriculture Watch. And it monitors the structural changes in farming systems. So Sarah, it's now you at the floor.
Merci, Madame Guillou. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, on behalf of Dr. Ibrahim Mayaki, I thank the G8 for organizing this conference on open data for agriculture and the World Bank for hosting it. To begin, I would like to reiterate the importance that the NEPAD, the New Partnership for Africa's Development, attaches to knowledge for the implementation of its flagship program, CAADP, the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program. As you may know, CAADP has become the framework through which African countries develop their agriculture strategies. Today, more than 40 African countries are involved in this process, and 30 have already established investment plans. Donors and international institutions are valuable partners for accompanying these progresses. And G8 has been key to mobilize efforts around the 2008 crisis at a time when CAADP was taking off. The role of NEPAD is to facilitate CAADP implementation by fostering consultations between stakeholders and providing expertise for the establishment of investment plans. To that end, exchange of experiences, capacity building, identification of best practices, monitoring and evaluation are the heart of our activities. CAADP is based on 3 principles: partnerships and alliances, dialogue that includes peer review and mutual accountability, and exploitation of regional complementarities and cooperation. In that regard, information sharing is absolutely essential to our approach. We need reliable information on concrete agricultural situations, as well as comparative data on the strengths and weaknesses of our region. It is with this information at our disposal that we will be able to build a vision for the future. Public information was among the first to be sacrificed under the structural adjustment period. States are still struggling to succeed in refloating their agricultural statistic systems, despite the support of valuable programs such as Paris 21st. Today, countries that maintain a regular rhythm for agricultural census can be counted on the fingers of one hand. International initiatives like the WOW, the World Agriculture Watch, will never replace the need to reinforce statistical systems at country level, but they are nonetheless very valuable tools to develop a better understanding of dynamics and trends of farming systems. Beyond polarized debates, the situation on the ground is increasingly complex, with interrelations between different forms of agriculture. Rapid structural changes are occurring with the strong driver of large-scale land acquisitions. There is an enhanced need to comprehend the way farming systems are organized and relate to the natural resource base, to rural society, and to markets. So how can the World Agriculture Watch how can it contribute to the open data system? The main goal of WOW is to bring the dynamics and relative performances of different types of agriculture into the policy debate in terms of production and economic, social, and environment sustainability at local and global levels, while taking anticipated changes into account. To achieve this, WOW aims to be a platform for knowledge generation, exchange, and debate. It is based on a network of local observatories located in representative areas where significant structural transformations are underway or foreseen. Among its partners, WOW includes farmer-based organizations so as to strengthen their capacities for participating in relevant policy debates. We see this initiative as a potential contributor to at least 2 of our major programs, which are specifically CAADP, in its capacity as the agriculture program adopted by the African Union, and Rural Futures, a program aimed at responding to the challenges and opportunities of rural Africa. After 10 years of existence, CAADP is at a crossroads. We now need to measure the impact of what has been achieved, as we initially focused on investments, emphasizing public investment planning. We now have to create an enabling environment for implementation and to adapt our strategic approach for the realization of our vision of agriculture for the decades to come. NEPAD is currently working on the definition of an African agriculture capable of taking up the challenges of food security, employment, and protection of our natural capital. Assessing and monitoring undertaken by the WOW observatories could therefore help us to understand how the economic environment affects the trajectories of farming systems, and therefore select the policy priorities and options we need to focus on. We completely share the holistic approach of WOW to address the role of agriculture in the process of rural transformation and its contribution to structural change. Nowadays, a major challenge for African agriculture is demography. Cohorts of newcomers arriving on the labor market must be absorbed, and in the short run, agriculture will be the main provider of employment. But not all production systems are equivalent in terms of labor and diversification. Analyses procured by WOW could enable us to better target agricultural models that generate employment and are able to contribute to higher added value in the countryside. It will help us in better designing the way we support the development of such models across the continent. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, we are convinced that this initiative can provide the much-needed observations and data leading to a pertinent analysis of the existing agricultural context. Furthermore, we foresee that the conclusions drawn from this exercise will be critical to NEPAD programs and to the development of strategies to adequately tackle African agriculture in a proactive, inclusive, and sustainable manner. We are therefore welcoming the World Agriculture Watch initiative with the hope that it will effectively accompany NEPAD in achieving its mandate of alleviating poverty for a prosperous Africa. I thank you.
In fact, you didn't see the clock, but she finished just 1 second after. So she was perfect. And in fact, you did not have the time to say that WOW plans to organize an international workshop at FAO headquarters on its information system to put it in line with open access and open data principles. So we are really in the heart of the topic of the day. So thank you, Sarah. So now we switch to a second initiative we already heard about this morning, that is GeoGlam. So I'm happy to give the floor to Barbara Ryan, which is Secretariat Director of the Intergovernmental Group on Earth Observation.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'll try and do as good as you did, Sarah. I'm finishing on time. These slides will be available. And so I'm going to go pretty quickly because you did hear from Chris Justice earlier today about a fair amount of this, but there are 2 slides that I want to spend some time on. And let's see if I can now I know why they're saying, does this count against my time? So first of all, another G8 initiative following the World Summit on Sustainable Development in 2002. The environmental ministers, not the agricultural ministers, but the environmental ministers got together and said, listen, we've got tremendous Earth observation resources. How can we bring them to bear on a number of society's problems? So today, 90 members, 67 participating organizations. Clearly, the G8 members are here. If your country is not here, we'll be here to talk to you because we would like, particularly in Africa, increase the membership in the group on Earth observations. Agriculture is one of those 9 societal benefit areas, and so that's obviously why we are here. The objectives. Improve and coordinate observation systems, advance broad open data policies. I'm going to come back to that. I've underscored that for this audience. Foster the increased use of EO data and information, and then build capacity, and I've underlined that as well. Listen, we've got tremendous assets in space right now, whether it's those meteorological satellites that you see in the outer ring or the polar orbiting satellites on the inside. But it's not just space-based assets. It's in situ or ground or surface-based assets as well. We've talked a lot about the importance of integration, particularly for agriculture. Both space-based and ground-based systems need to come together to be better integrated. And so in GEO, the Group on Earth Observations, a number of countries, a number of participating organizations have come together with support from the G20, and then also linkages with a program that Joe will be talking about later, are saying, okay, how can we in fact improve crop information for decision making? This is leading up to one of the slides I want to spend some time on. To the best of my knowledge, I think GEO, the intergovernmental organization, is the only international organization that is vigorously adopting and promoting broad open data sharing. So when we look at about our data sharing principles, full and open exchange of data, data and products at minimum cost, minimum time delay, free of charge or the cost of reproduction. This is the slide. I spent 34 years, actually, with the Geological Survey before moving to Geneva, Switzerland, and this is the Landsat story. For 40 years, data from that satellite was sold, $400 or $500 a scene when the U.S. government operated the satellite, $4,000 or $5,000 a scene when the private sector operated the satellite. Landsat's 4 and 5 in the middle 80s, and it wasn't until 2007 or 2008 when the policy changed to distribute the data over the internet that this graph occurred. So what you can see at the peak of data sales, 2001, 53 scenes a day were delivered. As soon as the data policy changed, it jumped up 2 orders of magnitude, almost 6,000 scenes a day. So what you see today, 9 million scenes downloaded to date, 186 countries. The entire user shift has changed. And I guess what I would say here is if you looked at who bought the data back when we were selling it for 53 scenes a day, number one, government agency. So one of the speakers earlier today that talked about Canada actually talked about government agencies will be a benefactor of this policy. So first, government agencies bought it. The second big user were the universities, where were they getting their data? From the National Science Foundation. The next biggest user was were contractors getting their data getting their money from the Defense Department. I can tell you we were just recycling federal money for this asset. 6 months ago, a private sector person came to me and said, Barb, I have to tell you, I fought you on this issue because I said you were going to compete with our business. He said, I'd like to tell you I have added 125 jobs to my small unit just to process Landsat data. So for all the discussion that's occurred this morning already about the value, the economic value is not in the data itself, it's in the downstream use and applications. This is an example of that. So if you look at the 25 countries that produce 80% of the world's crop and the GEO members, we've got pretty good overlap there. Obviously, the linkages between wheat prices, I think you saw this graph from Chris. I do need to say that the Landsat satellite was actually launched because of an agricultural need. It was the great grain robbery that occurred, how we've coined that great grain robbery, a debate between the United States and Russia back in the late 60s and early 70s, caused the launch of that Landsat satellite. You saw this graph, which is talks about the potential for improvement of those forecasts as we go through the season. You saw Chris's reference to this vegetation index, and that is an anomaly correlation. So how can we look at past practice, past years, this happens to be 2000 to 2011, and then also where we're currently right now. So the point here is that global data will bring more transparency and consistency to these measurements. This is the last story. This is the analog from a different discipline. It happens to be weather. It's a little bit of a complicated graph. What these 4 colors are the 3, 5, 7, and 10-day forecast, weather forecast. So it's an anomaly correlation, actually almost like what we saw with the NDVI anomaly correlation before, since 1981 to the present. So what do you see? For each of those forecasts, you see improvement over time. Why? Broad open data sharing, admittedly in a small community, the weather community, research, the importance of research, the importance of working together. And in fact, one other speaker today talked about the role of these centers, international centers that might process data. This happens to be the European Center for Middle Range Forecasting that's processing this data. But what I want to do is draw attention to this part of the graph. The northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere is the top of the line and the bottom of the line of each of those 4 colors. What you see in the late 1990s and the early 2000s is essentially the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere numbers have come together. Why? Because of satellite observations. And so I think agriculture is ripe for a story like this with the role of in situ and satellite-based observations to improve forecasts over time. So it could be wheat, corn, rice, and soy for our major forecasts, production forecasts, you pick the axis, but the point is all the policy pieces are in place for similar stories. So, in summary, governments need to adopt broad open data policies and practices for space-based and in situ or ground-based observations. A global observation strategy can bring both consistency and transparency to the effort. Obviously, international coordination and cooperation, like with the Group on Earth Observations, is essential, and GeoGLAM certainly represents an opportunity for delivering those results. Thank you very much, and Sharon, I didn't quite make it with yours, so thank you, everyone.
So thank you, Barbara. And obviously, you made a point about the fact that when it is on open access and then when it is free, it can create value, in fact. So our third initiative that has been launched by G20 countries is the WHEAT initiative. So Hélène is the international scientific coordinator of the WHEAT initiative that in fact was put in place to increase the wheat production, to fight food price volatility and contribute to food security. So I give the floor to Hélène.
Okay. Where is it? Okay. Thank you very much, Marion. So, yes. So, wheat, as you may know, is the most widely grown staple crop worldwide. It is also the most important protein source and second after rice for calories. So we expect a demand for wheat to increase by 60% in 2050. So all producing countries share an urgent need to increase the rate of wheat genetic and agronomic progress for yield, but also nutrient and water efficiency, adaptation to biotic and abiotic stress, while ensuring the production of high quality and safe products. So this is to answer this challenge that the WHEAT initiative was proposed by research and funding organizations from several countries and was endorsed by the G20 agricultural ministries in 2011, and that it contributes to their action plan for global food security. So the WHEAT initiative aims globally at identifying synergies and at nurturing collaborations in the international wheat research community. And it brings together, so far, 20 public and private members, but we hope, of course, to bring together more countries in particular. So one of the priorities of the WHEAT initiative, sorry, no, I went too far, okay. That was identified by the WHEAT initiative members was to implement an international wheat information system to optimize the exploitation of wheat data. So high-throughput genetic sequencing and phenotyping, as well as statistical genomics and computational efficiencies, are all expected to revolutionize wheat improvement. So at the moment, wheat genetic and genomic data are present, but they are scattered among different databases that do not necessarily share the same standards and formats, thereby making it really complex for scientists and breeders to efficiently find and relate information. The International Wheat Genome Sequencing Consortium is going to release a lot more data about the wheat genome, and that will add new resources to the pool. So harnessing the huge potential of these data sets will require bringing data such as phenotypic and agronomic together with the genetic and the genomic data. This will require that these data are, of course, both interoperable and integrated. So basically, the development of the wheat information system should allow us to bring together all sources of information related to wheat in a single entry point with a user-friendly interface for the biologists. It should also allow us to define guidelines for data curation, nomenclature, standards, and integration. It should ensure interoperability of data, allowing the search across databases and the setup of integrated databases focusing on specific data sets. And it should allow also the development of new services and tools for the community. So this wheat information system will be developed by a Wheat Initiative expert working group that will bring together, after an open call, experts from different countries to implement a proposal initially coordinated by INRA in France and BBSRC in the UK, and endorsed by the Wheat Initiative, and that is actually based on the needs expressed by the wheat scientific community through a survey that was realized in March last year. So the wheat information system structure is roughly represented here. It should operate as a hub integrating wheat data produced and submitted to public repositories by the research community. So it will rely on a network of existing bioinformatic platforms willing to contribute, of course, and to work in synergy to provide the wheat scientific community an easy access to wheat data. These platforms, each being considered as a wheat IS node, will share their resources and, for instance, staff, storage, infrastructures, and tools. A central node, called here Wheat IS Core, will provide a single entry point for the Wheat IS users. It will provide access to data and information through a web portal. This portal will give access to a central data file repository storing files with their associated metadata. A Google search engine will allow to find data available in the Wheat IS Core and its nodes, and also several dedicated integrated databases such as genomic, genetic, and phenotypic information, or comparative genomics and functional genomics will be available through the web portal. And we hope to also integrate environmental and management data when they will be available. So the principles on which the Wheat IS will rely upon are a collective building to better answer the needs of the wheat community based on a federated network of platforms, an incremental implementation to offer an operational IS to the wheat community as quickly as possible, and also, of course, the promotion of an open access model for data exchange. So we also want to implement the Wheat IS progressively in an iterative process with 3 main steps building on the previous ones as the infrastructure develops. The objective is to establish first a collaborative and interoperable network of platforms that will work together to define standards, formats, and nomenclatures in relation with international initiatives such as Transplant, Crop and Trait Ontologies, and the Research Data Alliance, for instance. After this first step, the Wheat IS will be seen as a network of platforms sharing data files on a central web file repository, with each platform maintaining their local database. After the second step, during which keywords and full-text search engines will be set up on the Wheat IS web portal, the Wheat IS will consist in a portal allowing access to the network of databases. Step 3 will integrate the data in one centralized information system, and integration will focus on relevant data sets chosen by the wheat research community. So it will allow scientists to navigate through data and explore their relationships, and they will produce integrated, consolidated, and consistent information that could be exported as data files to feed analysis pipelines and other information systems. And I'm nearly on time. I want to thank you, and also to thank the people, especially Adi Kenville and Mario Cacamo, who actually made this proposal and helped me produce the slides for this talk.
So thank you, Hélène, because after the GOAT, it gives a very good example of international collaboration and the usefulness of open data. So our another international initiative is the Agricultural Market Information System, and so Joseph Glover serves as chief economist at the Department of Agriculture in the US, and as such, he chairs AMIS at the moment. So Joseph, it's...
Well, thanks very much, Marion. As was just mentioned, so-called AMIS, the Agricultural Market Information System, was another one of the more tangible results, I think, that came out of the G20 ag ministerial under the leadership of France back in 2011. And I think it's instructive to go back to that period. The interest in the ministerial was due to all the high prices and that we had seen from 2007 and then a more recent food spike in 2010. There were a lot of different opinions on what to do about those, about food price spikes and how to address those. And I think that the one thing that all G20 members could agree on, there were actually two things. One is research and productivity, and I think the work that Hélène and Christian are going to be, and Christian will be talking about in terms of things like the Wheat Initiative, were one area. And then the other one was to improve market information system, and that's where this so-called AMIS fits in. I think the feeling is to provide better data on markets, that it would improve decision-making by consumers, producers, and policymakers, and hopefully avoid the sort of disruptions and poor policy choices I think that we saw during 2007, 2008, and 2010, 2011 with things like export bans and other disruptive policy instruments. Well, we've been at it for 2 years now, and I think a lot of progress has been made. One, a secretariat has been established out of the FAO, and they are charged with sort of putting together a lot of the work and organizing a lot of the work of AMIS with the help of a lot of the international organizations. So World Bank, IFPRI, OECD, IFAD, a number of organizations contributed to this effort. And I think it's also fair to say that the first year in particular, I think, was benefited from the strong leadership of the French, who chaired the AMIS in its first year, and I think really helped get it off the ground. So what's been done? Well, first of all, it was decided by G20 members to sort of initially restrict the focus to 4 major crops. And so we look at corn, wheat, rice, and soybeans. The idea is, obviously, as we're moving forward, that we will look at things like soybean products, things like soybean oil and soybean meal, but for the time being, focus on these crops. And so a lot of effort made on data collection. G20 members were asked to provide detailed information and timely information on things like production, consumption, and stocks. The latter category in particular, stocks, I think has been a great deal of interest because of what is generally felt as pretty poor information on stocks. But it doesn't just end there. I think that's also true for things like various aspects of consumption. This was helped, I think, in particular, USDA donated or made easy access to all of its data, the so-called PS&D database, which is a comprehensive many-commodity, a multi-country database that we update each month as we put out our situation and outlook reports. And then the other big, I think, a great deal of progress was made when we added the International Grain Council as one of the AMIS members, and they too brought in their data that they do an update monthly. The AMIS Secretariat has begun producing a market monitor, which comes out once a month. It comes out 9 times a year. But the website is now up and running, and I think as we move forward into the next year, what you will begin to see is an active database, an open database, where you will be able to go in and look at individual countries for individual crops and look at those production, consumption, and stock numbers be able to look at the USDA database, be able to look at the IGC database, and to look at the AMIS database to look at the various views on these commodities. Okay, I think the near-term focus certainly has been on improving data and analysis capacity. Thus far, we still have a few G20 members and AMIS members that haven't been providing all of the data that's necessary. And some of this is just what we're trying to work on here is to where there are capacity issues, that is, it's just difficult to get at some of that data, we want to identify those capacity issues, then potentially work to address those. And then secondly, even when there is not official data available, that we can get the analysts within those countries to give us some notion of either unofficial data or value judgments that they can supplement with some of their own research in terms of how some of these other data sources look. And I think there's been some progress there. Certainly we feel that we just had a meeting last week, and I think we identified some of the issues there, and hopefully we're going to move forward over the next year. In terms of the capacity building, obviously there's a lot of work already being done by Gates Foundation has been very helpful here. Japan has initiatives. USDA through NAS and ERS have been doing this for a while, and I think the issue is now how to concentrate this on these G20 members, or these AMIS members, because the AMIS does include not only the G20 members, but non-G20 members who are large consumers or producers of the commodities. Well, I often get the question is, well, what value does this bring? Because there's a certain amount, and I think the more cynical would say, is this just the emperor's new clothes in one sense? Are we just really repackaging existing information and calling it something new? And I would say no, that we are seeing some value added already on this front. The other question is, will this be a panacea for the sort of price volatility and disruptions that we've seen over the past few years? And I'd also say no to that. I think that clearly it will be a big help in terms of helping policymakers understand what the true nature of the markets are and what the factors are that are contributing to price volatility. But it obviously, the information in and of itself will only help insofar as that I think prevents poor policy making and things like that. And I would only, let me just conclude with the fact that over the last summer, of course, we had a large drought in the U.S., and we had very poor crops as well in the Black Sea region. And prices hit record levels, at least in nominal terms, surpassing even what we saw in 2007, 2008 for many commodities. And I think that at the time, there was active engagement by G20 members with meetings certainly following our crop production reports, where we got together over the phone, went through the data. The AMIS Secretariat sent around many market analyses of the individual of the commodities and what was going on. And I think there it was very clear that despite the high prices, that other measures like price volatility were not nearly as severe as what we saw in 2007, 2008. And I think to a degree, sharing that information, I think, if you will, was a calming influence. And I think to the degree that better information was made available, I think we did see, or thankfully we didn't see the sort of actions that many countries, and in fact many G20 members, frankly, took back in 2007, 2008. So with that, let me conclude, Chair, and sorry I went over.
Thank you very much, Joseph. We are so tight. I'm quite ashamed that with such good presentations, we have to be so short. But I think after the economic data, now we are going back to more global data on tropical agricultural platform. Emmanuel Tambi from FARA talked about the importance of data for research, education, and extension services. And so Christian Ost will present you the TAP. Is Deputy Director in Agrium and chairs the steering committee of the G20 Tropical Agricultural Platform Initiative at the moment. I give you the chair, Christian.
Well, thank you very much, Marion. Good afternoon. And I am a very lucky man. I am the last speaker of the last session of a very long day. Okay, this Tropical Agriculture Platform started in 2011 under the French G20 presidency, and was officially launched last year in Mexico in a meeting of the G20 agriculture chief scientists. The background and justification for this tropical agriculture platform are very straightforward. First, tropical regions encompass all but 4 of the world's least developed countries. And second, tropical areas have a very high potential for increased agriculture productivity and consequently reducing poverty and increasing food security. But, and there is a very important, but the countries in this region lack the resources and the capacities to develop their agriculture innovation systems. And that is what the TAP is doing, addressing this question of the capacity. So the TAP objective is to bring greater coherence between the different capacity development initiatives and to facilitate knowledge sharing to improve agriculture production and productivity in the tropics, with a particular focus on the small farmers. TAP is a multilateral, multi-sectoral facilitation mechanism, not a doer, a facilitation mechanism. We are bringing different categories of stakeholders at the global and the national level. At present, we have 30 institutions from different categories which are committed to work to develop the tropical agriculture platform, and we hope that more will join. And FAO is the global facilitator and hosts the TAP Secretariat. We have three categories of target groups: the policymakers and institutions dealing with agriculture innovation, the private sector, civil society, and the relevant development agencies. The first task which was carried out by TAP was to have asked the different tropical regions to make an assessment of the current capacities and the current needs in this field, to develop the strategic action plan and a common framework for capacity development, with the idea to have three expected outputs: an enhanced policy dialogue, effective capacity development partnerships, and enhanced knowledge exchange. We are just completing this assessment of the current capacity and needs in the three regions of Africa, Asia, and Latin America and Caribbean. And next week we will have in Rome a meeting to start drafting the strategic action plan. So now, how do we articulate the TAP and the open data for agriculture? TAP is providing three services: a policy dialogue space, a marketplace, and what we have called Tapipedia, which is probably more relevant for the open data that we are discussing today, which are the information system to enhance knowledge flows in support of capacity development of tropical innovation systems. But to be more concrete also, TAP, as the portal for tropical agriculture, can contribute to the open data by assessing the stakeholder groups generating and using open data in the tropics, by mapping the different data information resources available, mapping the capacity development resources and actions carried in the tropics, and promoting, facilitating the development and implementation of training programs on the generation and use of open data. On the other side, the open data can provide, facilitate access to TAP in two major fields. The first one will be a global picture, the global political and socio-economic context in which the TAP is working, and probably more important also, facilitated access to the foresight studies and to these different scenarios proposing different innovation systems, and therefore identifying the job of the future for which we will have to develop the capacity development. So, in conclusion, the TAP ambition is to fill the capacity gap to facilitate generation, access, and use of knowledge for increasing food security and environmental sustainability in the tropical region. As such, the TAP niche or TAP added value in open data is the capacity development dimension. So far, we didn't talk much about that dimension, but capacity development is critical if we found this G8 initiative to benefit all categories of stakeholders and have a real impact. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christian. I think it was very interesting to have 5 very different examples of international initiatives that all are able to feed the open data for agriculture. Each one in a different field, I mean geographical and production data, genomic data, economic data, and so on. And so first, so that you prepare your many questions, I will ask Sarah what she thinks about the TAP initiative.
Well, thank you. Just one general comment first. I would say that given the lack of adapted data for agriculture systems available through the African continent, all the initiatives that were presented here today are totally relevant and particularly useful. So I'm glad to hear about all of them. But for a complete understanding of the agricultural trends, I think we need to ensure that end users, such as farmers' organizations, policymakers, governments, regional entities, scientists, local business communities, and civil society, among others, we really need to ensure that all the stakeholders are involved and are able to understand the technical approach that is used and to appropriate the produced data and to complement them for their own benefit. That is very important. And this can be achieved by strengthening national capacities, hence the relevance of capacity development as emphasized by the Tropical Agriculture Platform presentation. Thank you.
So thank you, Sarah. Yes, so one question is ready. Thank you.
Dave Gustafson, I was very interested in the comment from Joseph Glauber at the end that the activities of AMOS may have contributed to lower price volatility despite the challenges. Did I understand your comment correctly? And is that something that's where you're planning to report on that, or more comments?
If I said that, I misspoke. What I meant was less that it contributed to lower price volatility, because I think you're clearly dealing with market fundamentals, and I think what it did, I think, was prevent a lot of the policy actions that we saw in 2007, 2008, which would exacerbate price volatility. And that certainly is the case. That I think that anyone looking at 2007, 2008, and to a degree 2010, 11, but more 2007, 2008, that we did have a very short supply situation. We had for at least, certainly for wheat, and then a little less so, but still for some of the other grains. But what really was the big problem is the fact that countries started taking actions that sort of beggar thy neighbor policies that either by preventing exports or by subsidizing imports or all sorts of things that one can do that create further disruptions in the market. And I think to a degree that's where I think AMOS, at least this time, certainly it gave everyone kind of a common footing and a common understanding of what was going on in these markets. And I think the fact that we could point to measures like price volatility and other indicators and saying this is a far better situation than what we saw in 2007, 2008. Things like rice, where the rice crop, we were seeing a near global record rice crop. And so no problems whatsoever on the rice side. And even in wheat, where we saw some talk about perhaps export bans and things. I think at the end of the day, we still saw a lot of exports coming out of the Black Sea, for example. And I think that helped, again, we now look at where prices are only 6 months later, and they're substantially lower. And you saw that those prices began to break in the summer, and I think that was I won't pin all of that on AMOS, because I don't think that it is a panacea, but I think it is certainly helpful to have that sort of information out there.
Thank you. There is another question.
Hello, my name is Takashi Kiyura from MEX, Japan. This is not a question but a comment for the Barbara Ryan's presentation. So regarding the geogram activities, and let me firstly introduce the Japan leading activities with so-called Asian Rice project. That is the 9 countries, including Japan, Asian countries, the membership, and this is an initiative to improve Asian activities, Asian capacities, abilities to improve monitoring rice and also estimate production. And one of the future of this project is this is also supported by Asian Development Bank. And so I think this combination may be a good example for the geogram activity in Africa, and I want to have your comment. Thank you.
So, Barbara?
Yes, Takashi, thank you very much for making that point, because I think that is your reference, and I'm sorry if my slide didn't call out the Asian Rice Monitoring Initiative. I think maybe it did on one of the small bullet points, but we very much appreciate that and look forward to full incorporation of that into GeoGlam. But you're right, that is the only example that I know where the development banks are coming in and actually making some investments in this part of the world. So what we want to do is reinforce the Asian Development Bank activities for Japan. I understand they have a separate fund for China, and so some discussions last week in Beijing talked about tapping into that. And then I'm staying here one day later to talk to the World Bank to see if we can also structure a conversation with them along those lines. But South American and African, absolutely the same thing. I guess the only other thing I would add real quickly is that the Geoplenary, our governing body in November, accepted a broader stakeholder engagement strategy. And so our governing body has now opened it up so that GEO can in fact interact with, cooperate with the private sector, the development banks, and the foundations. And so in one of the earlier panel discussions today, I think one of the speakers really talked about robust public-private partnerships and the importance of that. And I think this topic is perfect for that action. So thank you for the comment.
Thank you. So, the next question.
Hello, yes, thank you. Thanks to all the panelists. My name is Colleen Rozier. I'm with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and my question was for Ms. Lawan from NEPAD. I was wondering, you had mentioned something about labor-intensive agriculture, and I wasn't sure if I'd heard that correctly, but I was wondering if so, if you would elaborate on it, because a lot of times you hear about reducing the amount of labor needed for agriculture, and you were talking more about using agriculture for increasing the amount of jobs. So if I heard that wrong, I may have heard that wrong, but I was interested in elaboration if that was correct. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I don't know if I talk about intensive, but labor and diversification, that's for sure in agriculture in Africa. Because we have this demographic challenge, we really need to involve as much as people as possible and in this sector. And we want to make it business friendly, in a business way. And so this is the way we plan to tackle this.
Thank you. Next question.
Hello, my name's Dennis Olson with the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union. My question is for Mr. Glauber. Joe, the last year, I think it was about last year at this time, there were some industry and academic studies on price volatility in commodity markets that estimated that between 60 cents and 90 cents of the rise in gas prices to $4 last year came directly from financial speculation by Wall Street on commodity markets. As far as I remember, I haven't seen any similar type of analysis on agricultural commodity side of that, and was wondering if the Amos group has discussed that or looked at looking into that further.
Yeah, it's a good question, and of course, I alluded to at the outset a lot of the differences of opinion within even G20 members on a number of issues, and speculation is one. There has been a lot of empirical work dealing with agricultural commodities. I think that the general feeling, and again, it may be showing my bias here, but my general conclusion from the literature is that it had very little to do with price volatility. I mean, you look at these markets, and there's a lot of fundamental reasons why we've seen high prices and when you have very low stocks, volatility unfortunately comes with that. I mean, that's one of the nice things that large stockpiles will do, is they can buffer the effects of price volatility. However, that comes at a cost. You have to store the grain. And so I look at, the basic fundamentals that were going on in 2007, 2008, 2010, 11, and looking at the studies that have been done, I can't see any real hard evidence that speculation was a problem there. I mean, there's a lot of evidence lying around that you can say, yeah, those supplies were really tight. We nearly ran out of hard wheat. And so at least that's my take, and I think that's a pretty widely held consensus, at least among agricultural economists, on the agricultural markets.
But there is the consensus there doesn't need to be a similar study like there was in the oil markets, or
no? There are studies.
There are studies on the ag side?
There's a lot of studies out there.
Right.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to point you to some of them. Thanks.
So, is there a last question? Or shall we conclude? Because we have 4 minutes. Yes, the last one.
I have a question for Christian. The Tropical Agriculture Pro platform sounds like a very interesting initiative. Could you just give us a little bit more detail on who's part of it?
Well, I briefly mentioned that at present we have 30 partners who have committed to the Tropical Agriculture Platform. We have the regional fora also. We have members, institutions from the G20, obviously. We have also the civil society, and so there is a mix of that. You have a website which is active on TAP, which will provide the list of these partners. One point that I didn't mention in my presentation is that we got a strong support also of Brazil and China in this Tropical Agriculture Platform, and we will have a workshop to end a Partners Assembly early September in China at the invitation of the Chinese Ministry of Agriculture to endorse the Strategic Action Plan of TAP.
So thank you, Christian. Thank you, all of the speakers. So, of course, data alone cannot feed the babies, but by the knowledge they bring, by the innovation they make possible, by the anticipation and transparency they can carry, in fact, they contribute to food security. So I think during all the day, we have seen a lot of very good examples, a lot of usefulness of the data. And I want, before leaving the room, to thank you all for your resilience during that long day, to thank the organization for a very useful meeting, and to the open data follow-up. So thank you to all of you.